is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Tonight, a special edition of CBS Radio News, The United Nations in Action, a live-running series hosted by Larry LeSueur.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Larry LeSueur, and you're listening to CBS Radio News, The United Nations in Action. Tonight, the latest session of the Third Committee at the UN Human Rights Conference has answered some questions while asking others. The committee officially voted on multiple things, amending Article 16 to include in any given state when regarding religion, rejecting Jamil Barudi's amendment to remove religious conversion from Article 16, and the most controversial decision, officially declaring in a proper UN vote to have the human rights draft become a covenant. In other news, the Third Committee had five different speakers in their most recent sessions. The speeches were followed with lively debate, which led to the official vote to declare the draft a covenant. Finally, allegations galore coming out of the Third Committee as multiple anonymous sources have come to CBS News with shocking claims that challenge the very sanctity of the Third Committee itself. But first, CBS Radio News, The United Nations in Action, is officially sponsored by Gillette. Gillette, look sharp, feel sharp.
Look sharp, feel sharp, be sharp and listen, mister. How are you fixed for blades? Do you have plenty? How are you fixed for blades? You better check. Please make sure you have enough, 'cause a worn out blade makes shaving mighty tough. How are you fixed for blades? Better look. Gillette Blue Blades, I mean.
Welcome back, everyone. This is CBS Radio News, The United Nations in Action. Our coverage begins with the Third Committee's vote that took place before and after speeches were conducted. For Article 16, two amendments were proposed. Article 16 is concerned with religious freedom for people. The first amendment proposed was to add to the article the words, "in any given state," and will not be given preferential or discriminatory treatment by their government based on their religion. The second amendment proposed was by Saudi Arabian delegate Jamil Baroudi, who wanted to see Article 16's protection of religious conversion removed. After a brief debate period, both amendments were voted on. The first amendment won approval with 12 votes for yes, 1 for no, and 2 abstentions. The second proposal did not win approval, though, with only one person voting for it, the amendment's writer himself, Jamil Baroudi. After Article 16's amendments were settled, the committee then began discussions around the infamous Declaration versus Covenant debate. Charles Taywater of South Africa mentioned the PACP's recent comments about escalating efforts to be heard depending on the outcome of the committee's vote. This led to another discussion hypothesizing what enforcement of the covenant would look like, including a hypothetical that started with the words, quote, "say that Russia is being all silly-willy." This point was not deeply explored, however. Once discussions ceased, speeches began. 5 speakers presented. The first was Walter Francis White of the NAACP, whose speech was focused around racial discrimination. He emphasized protecting Articles 2 and 6 and wanted to see Article 6 amended to include dialogue of the realm of protecting the underrepresented. Former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was up next, and much of her discussion revolved around religious freedom and conversion, while also emphasizing workers' unions. She would go on to say, quote, "basic rights of the people must be protected," a line in her speech which encapsulates the sole issue of the conference: what are basic human rights that deserve protection? Mr. Kaminsky of Belarus was the following speaker, who focused on fascism and the potential of Nazism to create atrocities. Kaminsky went on to say that fascist and Nazi-like ideology and dialogue must be outlawed. He also went on to say that eliminating discrimination and protecting the right to work will stop fascism. Next up was a speech by Mr. Rudolph of the World Zionist Committee. Much of his speech also centered around Nazism and its harmful effects, noting that all Nazi-like behavior should be condemned and those who do terrible things must be tried in court. The final speaker was Ostrigicilo de Ataide of Brazil, who focused himself on oppressive governments and, after a series of anecdotes, asked the United Nations to protect people against oppressive governments and went on to mention the idea of helping people rise back against oppressive governments as well. After speeches concluded, debates began in the conference hall with Bernardino asking de Ataide if his speech included women, to which de Ataide replied yes. His speech did not give direct mentioning of women. The most controversial debate point was whether to ratify this human rights draft as a declaration or a covenant. P.C. Chang of China began these discussions with Bernardino asking if the United Nations was going to bend to the will of the protesters. In our last edition of the United Nations in Action, protesters from the PACP noted their protest efforts were likely to escalate depending on this key issue in the conference. Chang went on to say that he does not stand with the protesters and was, quote, iffy about the covenant and recommended calling it a declaration until the details within the document were finalized. However, William Hodgson, the original proposer of the covenant, insisted the vote occur in that very moment. The proposal to make the draft a covenant was officially voted on with 7 in favor, 5 against, and 3 abstaining. This officially meant that the human rights draft was declared a covenant, which has severe implications in terms of international law and the enforcement of the document. Charles Taywater would also take a moment after the vote to briefly explain in person his comments from a prior session, which many believed justified fascism. Taywater originally released a statement clarifying himself, but he wanted to take the moment to clarify things in person. Taywater noted that he had quite a long day when he made his original remarks and said he, quote, blundered. He reemphasized that he does not support fascism, but understands how his comments could have been misunderstood. When CBS Radio News, the United Nations in Action returns, allegations are swirling around the Third Committee with multiple anonymous sources approaching CBS News about various pieces of information. We will discuss everything in the rumor mill in just a moment, right here on CBS Radio News.
Pee-wee Reese has a way with Dodger rookies or Sandlot youngsters. Pee-wee, you do a lot of work with boys.
Not work, Al. I like baseball and kids. I enjoy helping teenagers start right.
Oh, that's around shaving age, and you give them pointers on personal appearance, too?
Yes, a boy has more self-respect when he's clean-shaved. I tell him to use a Gillette razor, Al.
You said it, the Gillette Super Speed Razor. And today there are 3. Light for sensitive skin and most younger men. Regular for average skin and beard. Heavy for men who like the heft and feel of a heavier razor. Each is different, precisely engineered. One has the right blade edge exposure, edge angle, and weight to shave you in a breeze. Comfortable, good-looking shaves you may never have had before. And convenient, you change blades and rinse clean, so. Choose your Gillette Super Speed Razor. $1.29 with Gillette Blue Blade dispenser and handy travel case.
Welcome back, everybody, to CBS Radio News, the United Nations in Action. For our final segment, rumors are abundant in the Third Committee, with multiple anonymous sources approaching CBS News about information regarding various delegates in the conference. Starting off, one anonymous source approached CBS regarding the wives of the USSR. According to this source, many wives of the USSR diplomats are being barred from leaving the Soviet Union even while their husbands are abroad. This source went on to state that this would be a violation of the draft, according to Article 11, and its allowance for freedom of movement and residence within states, and also counters the right to leave a country, including a home country. CBS News reached out to Alexei Pavlov of the USSR for a response. He said he would get back to CBS News, but has yet to respond at the time of this recording. Shifting focus, CBS News is still actively reporting on this situation as it appears to be multi-layered. Originally, CBS News was approached by a source claiming that Saudi Arabia would trade votes with France in exchange with France using their veto power to prevent Saudi politicians from standing trial. The source also said that the USSR would try to get China's seat in the Security Council handed over to the communist revolutionaries in China, to which Alexei Pavlov said he would get back to us on. Jamil Baroudi of Saudi Arabia responded to the allegation of a vote trade with France, saying, quote, "This claim is not true. While the allegation is false, it does expose a potential complication of making this document legally binding that I, Baroudi, hope will be addressed by this convention," end quote. Rene Cassin of France also stated that, quote, "If Saudi Arabia approaches us and asks us to use our veto power for their interests, we will not be doing it," end quote. Shortly after, another anonymous source came to CBS News claiming that the allegations about the USSR's interest in the Chinese seat and the French vote trade were fabricated in an attempt to get attention away from Baroudi himself. The source also went on to claim that if Saudi Arabia was legitimately looking into removing the USSR's voting power, as reported on previously, quote, with multiple countries supporting the idea, and that the only reason it wasn't pursued was because the information hit the news cycle too early. This source went on to say that Baroudi may still attempt to see the USSR's vote removed. Baroudi responded to these allegations, saying that while he did indeed look into the removing of the USSR's voting power, he ultimately dropped the plan and said that, quote, he had approached several countries for their opinions, all of whom never explicitly said they would vote in favor of such a proposal, end quote. Baruti went on to say, quote, I was unaware of the allegations that the USSR wishes to remove China from the conference. Saudi Arabia will oppose any such motion, end quote. He also went on to say that the allegation about French voting trades were untrue and likely falsified by an anonymous source. He also went on to say that the source claiming he fabricated these allegations is wrong and questions how the report would take attention away from him, saying, quote, does this not simply thrust me into the spotlight once more, end quote. Baruti later reached out to CBS News to speak about the protesters. When asked about whether he was worried delegates were in potential danger, Baruti said, quote, I'd say I'm not. Our facilities' security is very good, end quote. Baruti went on to say that his only worry would be while delegates, quote, are in transit or in their hotels. He went on to say that he's sure the hotels have good security with people waiting to infiltrate it, probably, quote, having to go through a staff entrance or having a friend at the hotel. Baruti went on to say, quote, he admires the protesters outside for their fervor in which they have championed their beliefs. He went on to say that he wants them to know they, quote, have an ally in this convention with me, Jamil Baruti. He went on to say he encourages the politically motivated to make their opinions heard in any way they feel necessary. Jamil Baruti also spoke on the translator error that was seen at a previous session, claiming that, quote, there's a rumor going around in the UN's committee that it was not a translation error. Rather, some delegates didn't read communications with their home countries and have no idea what their constituents wanted going into the conversation about the Declaration or the Covenant, end quote. Baruti went on to say that, quote, their aides had to tell them that they voted, quote, wrongly. Baruti said that he finds it hard to believe that no one agreed with him on his viewpoints on removing religious conversion from the Covenant. That's going to do it for tonight's edition of CBS Radio News, the United Nations in Action. CBS Radio will continue to produce more editions until the Human Rights Conference has come to a close. For CBS Radio News, I'm Larry Lasser. Good night, everybody.